This is WCRN Weekend with your host, Pat Rice.
You are now tuned in to another episode of WCRN Weekends with Pat Rice on AM 830. And today we have from the Worcester Police Department, the Deputy Chief of Police, Mr. Edward J. McGinn. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Pat.
Hey, it's great to have you here. Could you tell us how you gained an interest with wanting to be a part of the police force?
Actually, it was kind of a roundabout way. I wasn't one of these guys who grew up as a little kid saying I always wanted to be a police officer. I actually went to school at Worcester State in business, and I had taken a couple of civil service tests because I had some minor interest in that sort of thing. And right about the time I was graduating in 1985 from Worcester State, I was also being backgrounded by the police department for a class to start in October. So I graduated in May and just worked, my part-time job, and in October, at the ripe age of just 21, started with the Worcester Police Department in the police academy.
And how was that when you first started off, being so young in your early 20s? Did you enjoy it?
I did. It was a lot of fun initially, but then when you look back at, and here's the ironic part, I was 21, which was considerably younger than most people go on the job. Just months before, I was entrusted by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts with a beer. Fast forward 6 months later, I'm entrusted with a gun, a cruiser, and a badge, and the right to take people's liberty away. So that was kind of a monumental thing for me, and it always stayed with me, because it's such the authority that I vested in police officers is just so tremendous.
It really is, and being a part of the police department, our law enforcement in general, you guys have a lot of duties, a lot of responsibility. And society, people seem to put a lot on officers, whether it's good praise or bad praise. You guys kind of are being pulled in all different kind of directions. How was the Worcester Police Force when you first joined them? You said back in 85?
Yeah, that was back in 85. And if you remember then, all the bosses then were the gray-haired guys like I am now. And these were World War II Korean War veterans. That era, and sometime later we had the Vietnam veterans officers, but it was a different time. And these guys grew up on footbeats. They grew up without any police radios. Not so much grew up, but went through their policing careers out there on their own, and they were out there in the footbeats, and without backup or anything like that. And they were told, "This is your area. Take care of it." Fast forward to 1985, when I came in, we had radios, we had cruisers. Very few footbeats at the time, and it was just different worlds between the people who were the bosses then and those of us who just came on then.
So you could kind of see a transitioning happening?
Yes, technology had really started to improve at that stage of the game, with the radios and our ability to for quick response, which the neighborhood beat cop was by then a thing of the past. For better or worse, and it was all about the professionalism inside the cruiser. But unfortunately, when you're inside the cruiser with the windows rolled up, you don't get out to meet the people as much, and that's what was lost with the footbeat cop of yesteryear.
The people that you meet were the ones that you're taking into the back seat of the cruiser.
It got to be where you just dealt with calls, 911 calls. And you didn't get to out and just talk to, John Public on a regular basis walking along the sidewalk. And that's what gave rise later on to the community policing era, where the officers got back into the neighborhood, where they, started working with the public and not just criminals. When you think about it, that's 99.9% very good people out there and 0.1% criminals. And for a period of time, we were only concentrating on the criminal element. Well, we neglected the good people out there. And with community policing, we went back and we focused on them.
Yeah, about being a part of the community as well and giving them a helping hand. You mentioned about technology happening in the 80s and with radios. You could even mention bugs, something that I read that was big in the 80s, especially for taking down certain members in the mafia, was planting in bugs and hidden cameras that would record conversations. Or surveillance, would you call it?
Yeah, that happened to a very small degree. I was aware of some telephone wires that had been put in place, but those are very, very closely controlled by the courts. more so in Massachusetts than any other place in the country. And very difficult to obtain those warrants and very stringent standards to monitor those. And there has to be some type of organized crime nexus. So not so much on the day-to-day did we do the bug thing or the wire. And, there was laws in the Commonwealth rule, unless it's pursuant to a warrant, you really can't monitor people's voices without their knowledge. So maybe that's a good thing for all of us.
Especially nowadays with the cell phones.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah.
And all the technology that we have now. How would you say, how were the streets of Worcester back in the mid-'80s, early '90s? What were some of the biggest issues that you would see?
Well, it's it's probably the same stuff we see now. It just moves. It moves from one place to another. Back when I first came on the job, I worked 11 to 7 on what was Route 11, and that was the Kilby Street area. That was down by where the Boys Club is now. Very, very, very rough, blighted area. Well, you drive down Kilby Street now, it's Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. It's pastel different colored houses. The CDC did an amazing job. The Boys and Girls Club is down there now. And the criminal element that used to inhabit Kilby Street, some of the gangs that used to reside down in that area, aren't there anymore. It's just decent people trying to get their way through life. And we have an anchor down there in the Boys and Girls Club. And and that's been helpful too. So that area is coming up fast. There's a lot of building going on down there, and a lot of professionals are living in some of the lofts and townhouses and the condominiums that are being developed down there now.
Would you say that there was some drug issues back in Worcester then?
Yeah, Worcester's always been a hotbed for IV drug use, and there was speculation at one time that the birthplace of hepatitis C was Worcester.
Really?
We always did have a heroin trade here in Worcester, and it was always encapsulated generally in just a few areas. Back in the day, it was Main South, and now it's moved down to more central Main Street. But there were a lot of folks out there who are afflicted with opioid addictions, and there's more and more each day, unfortunately. And as much as we try to get a handle on it, it's still out there. So we're working on it. We have to work on that every single day.
Yeah, how do you feel about the opiate crisis? I mean, do you ever see it getting better?
Yeah, I mean, you have to work on it on a number of different fronts. I know they're working with the doctors out there to be more mindful in the prescribing of these medications. Let's face it, somebody's in a bad motor vehicle accident or has surgery. They're going to need some type of pain medication. But we need to develop a plan to get them off that. And that's what the docs are doing now. And I know that's a big thing at UMass with their new docs. But we also need to have treatment for the people who do have addictions. Not everybody gets addicted because of prescription pain medicines. They just toy with drugs and they get this addiction. So we need to be able to provide them treatment to get out from underneath that. And oftentimes it deals with whether it be methadone or some other medically assisted treatment to get them drug-free. And
now you said there were certain areas where you see that activity more heavily compared to others. Would you also say, I know drugs don't exclude, it includes everyone, it doesn't exclude anyone, but is there a certain group of people that specifically seem to be moving the drugs within the area and are using the drugs?
Well, insofar as those who are that's completely wide open, it affects every single economic strata that we have. It's from wealthy families all the way to the poorest of the poor who develop addictions. Unfortunately, the folks who typically sell drugs are afflicted with addictions themselves, and they've gotten to the point where they're just selling drugs merely to feed their own addictions. So it's a rough bunch of customers sometimes, and it's even a rougher bunch of sellers.
So how can the law enforcement help those that may be going through addiction? If you, let's say, take a drug dealer off the street, there is possible jail time, but is there also, we can help you go to rehab, or is there some kind of programs available?
At our department, we do have a program where if someone comes in, seeks our help in getting into treatment, we will certainly endeavor to help them. And we have an officer who spends her entire week doing that each and every day.
How many calls a day do you think you get for heroin or a drug overdose in the city of Worcester?
I would suspect probably 5 or 6 calls a day for overdoses. And that's the ones we receive. We don't know how many people just walk into the emergency rooms or or go to some other medical facility. Thankfully, the Narcan is out there. Many of our city employees, to include all police, all fire, some of our people over at the library even have Narcan.
Yeah.
And by the efforts of groups like AIDS Project Worcester, they're really getting the Narcan out there. So people who do have addictions have it with them, thankfully, and that saves a lot of lives. And if not for that wonder drug, and it really is a wonder drug, we would be losing people by the hundreds every year.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. We're already losing a lot of people as it is now. Besides drugs, what are some of the other calls that you guys may receive on a daily basis?
Well, a lot of it deals with homelessness and mental illness. And when you look at the three of them, it's like the unholy trinity of human misery: homelessness, mental illness, and drug use. And a lot of times, some of these folks are afflicted with all three. And back when I was a kid, we used to, go out for family drives, and you look at these big hospitals on the side of the road where literally hundreds of people would live who unfortunately were afflicted with mental illness. That's where they lived. Well, they don't have those buildings anymore, and the few buildings they have for mental health facilities are restricted for the very, very deeply disturbed mental health issues. Mm-hmm. And so consequently, a lot of them are community-based, and a lot of them do well, but a lot don't. And some people out there with with mental illnesses may self-treat with a variety of drugs, with alcohol. Gives rise to problems with them complying in, say, a group facility or a group home, and they get tossed out. Now they're homeless, and now they're walking around the city. They don't look great. Some people would consider that unsightly. They don't want to see these folks, but they simply have no place to go. Mm-hmm. And it's our responsibility as a city and we, the police department, to take care of these folks and get them into shelters, especially in weather where they could perish.
Definitely. Would you say that the homeless population has grown within Worcester due to the recent opiate epidemic, and the rise of mental illness is a huge one nowadays? You always hear people talking about it in the news.
Yeah, you know what? There's a lot more folks out there who are in need. A lot more folks we're seeing with, real intense mental illness and addictions. But luckily, there's a lot of programs out there that deal with these folks and get them into housing and get them into treatment. And that is working. But it's just basically holding the tide back at this point. And, especially in the winter months, these folks are outside, and we just literally have to go around and bring them into shelters.
It's horrible. Yeah. I can't even imagine. Now, how long did it take you to rise up to be the deputy chief of police?
Well, I was promoted ultimately to deputy chief in 2009. When I was a patrolman for 10 years. Then I was a sergeant. I worked predominantly in the Internal Affairs Division thereafter, and after 5 more years, I got promoted to lieutenant, and 5 years thereafter, I was promoted to captain, where I was in charge of the Detective Bureau. That was one of the best jobs I ever had. And then 4 years thereafter, in 2009, I got promoted to deputy chief.
And what did you like so much about being a part of the detective, the FBI?
The detective unit, they investigate all major crimes. So with the murders, they also have a unit within for special crimes, and that would be sexual assaults and handling the sex offenders and so forth. And so that was kind of interesting. Any time there was a homicide, I'd be expected to respond and just keep the chief well informed as to what's going on with this investigation, because ultimately that is the pinnacle of all crimes, is taking the life of another human being. Mm-hmm. So we place all the importance in those investigations, and we're just absolutely relentless. The entire squad is working on that round the clock, right from the outset until we get the thing solved.
Yeah, and homicides are something that every city wants to keep down. I mean, you always see articles that come out. For an example, they say like New Orleans is the murder state or murder capital of the state or whatever, and they relate their numbers to other big cities. Would you say that the homicide numbers have declined within Worcester in recent years, or is it kind of back and forth?
Well, it ebbs and flows. In fact, last year in 2017, we had not a single firearms homicide.
Wow.
Well, we did have a number of homicides, and it was a very low number, lower than the year before and lower than the year before that. And so they are on the decline, but it doesn't take much to really to inflame a happenstance where the gangs would be shooting at one another. You know, sadly, earlier this year on a Saturday night, we had a young man, 16 years of age, who was shot and killed in the upper Main Street area, Main and Holland Road. He was shot by another young person. So, you know, and we're working on that one still, and that's yet to be solved. It will be solved, but it's not yet solved. And anytime you lose, especially a 16-year-old, that's especially heartbreaking. You lose anybody, it's heartbreaking. But, you know, it's this gang business you really have to look really hard at.
It seems to be such a big issue.
Yeah.
Would you say that gangs have kind of gotten out of control in a way within our society? They're all over the place.
They are, but, you know, once you stand back and look at it, they're out there for a couple reasons to start right from the get-go. Well, first of all, it involves some level of connection for kids, where they start recruiting very young. But the gang wouldn't be there unless they had some type of business, and typically it's drug dealing. So, you know, if one were to stay clear of the drug trade, both buying and selling, and of the gang business, you're absolutely fine at Worcester. You have nothing to worry about insofar as being a victim of any type of violent crime. Those who choose to play in those circles are putting themselves in peril. And as was the case of this young man, I'm not saying he was a gang member, but he may have been looked upon as one by whoever shot him. You know, that's another statistic insofar as the gangs. And our gang unit is out there every single day on a couple different bases. First, deterrent with the younger kids to keep them out of the gangs in the first place. And then later in the night, they're out there working with the actual gang players to keep them apart from one another and try to get a pulse on what's going on within the gangs and in between the gangs.
How has technology changed throughout the years to help police units take down these gangs or crime in general?
Well, back in '94, our department went automated, where all the records are no longer on paper. It goes into a computer system. And that seems so long ago, but before then, everything was on paper. And to go from one department to another, or to just simple email wasn't even a thing before then. You're not as old as I, but you probably don't remember life without email, without a cell phone. I do.
And for a short period of time.
And, you know, by thinking back, my first cell phone came in a bag with an enormous battery and a cord. And look where we've come now.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. So just a communication means of working within the department and working with other departments has improved 1,000%.
Would you say that social media has helped in finding criminals?
Yes, yeah, it has a great deal. Occasionally, we will ask for the public's help and put a picture out there, because quite often, just about every multi-unit residence or public housing facility or store or restaurant or building, and even some of the intersections of the city have video, and we're able to capture some of those video images and put out, we're looking for this person in connection with an incident that took place here. And once that goes out public, I would say 8 times out of 10, we're going to get a name back. Generally, we give our officers a crack at it as to who an individual is. And the majority of the time, our officers know who the players are. If failing that, we'll send it out to other departments, to other law enforcement professionals, and then to the public ultimately.
Would you say that some of these criminal figures, when they get caught for a crime and they're being interrogated about information, does it seem like they are willing to give out the information more, or are they less likely to talk?
Well, everybody's incentivized in some ways. You know, it's quite often when you really get the goods on somebody, they're looking for a deal. So at that point, we have to work with their attorney and the district attorney to see what they have for us. And with the assistance of the defense attorney and the district attorney, they can offer a proffer to offer information about X in exchange for some consideration later on down the road when it comes to sentencing or charging. And these are very well thought through plans. It's nothing we can do with an individual officer in the interview room. And by the way, every one of our interviews is video and audio recorded. So there's no magic that goes on in there. It's just, you know, real gumshoe question and answers. And, you know, we hit everybody's rights. They ask for a lawyer, the interview stops. But, you know, if the person's willing to talk with us, we'll talk. And oftentimes we've got to find out what motivates them to talk. So it's a give and take. And our detectives are very well versed in communication skills. So, and that's the value of any detective, their ability to talk with, whether it be the bank president or the homeless guy. You got to be able to talk from one second to another on both levels.
Exactly, and able to communicate with all different kind of walks of life,
Yeah, and they can.
Would you say, have you noticed a shift with how the general public views law enforcement and authority throughout the years?
Yes, I would. It's, there's been some very highly publicized incidents where law enforcement has not been looked at in the most positive way. And you can always point to a horrible police shooting where an officer inappropriately fired his weapon and perhaps shot and killed somebody. And it's hard to come back from that. And it's hard to just say, well, that happened there. And no, people look at the uniform and it's the same, and they like to think it's the same uniform, whether it be California or in Idaho or in Worcester. And they think the bad things that happen in other states may happen here. And despite our training and the standards that we adhere to here, it's but something bad is something. Bad incidents like that is something we work so hard to avoid with training our officers, and I would suggest our training is second to none in how well we train our officers.
One of those incidents, it just takes that 1% of people that can tarnish like a whole image for a whole other group of people and ruin it for everyone else. Would you say that pop culture and social media also doesn't help with the image that it might try to push upon the youth about law enforcement? Like an example would be like the lyrics in hip hop music.
Yeah, that's never helpful. But when you think of lyrics and then you think of say the video games, I mean, I think everybody will admit some of the video games you see out there now are kind of over the top.
Mm-hmm,
and some people can play them for hours and be fine. Well, some can't. Likewise, some people can feed into some of the lyrics and some of the songs that are out there and be fine. Others can't. And you worry about those folks who can't. And you worry about them as people that think that, well, is this real? I don't want to put a correlation between, say, these music lyrics and videos as being correlating to any type of outside violence, but it's been shown to be the case in civil shootings, for example, in a number of different cases. So it's troubling in that sense, and it really just pales the standards of our civilization where you go out and shoot prostitutes with a gun on in a video game. This is, what's that from? What's that from? I mean, normal human beings don't do this stuff.
Yeah, no, and unless you want to go to jail.
Yeah, and even then, it's
not normal behavior.
It certainly isn't. It just brings the violence up to a heightened level, and it may dull some people's senses to it. I don't want to vilify the music industry or the video gaming industry, but there's a small fraction of people out there that may negatively influence.
That comes to mind. Do you guys have a lot of crimes that involve instant messaging, sending photos, sexting?
Yeah, it happens. We get a lot of people over Facebook and some of these other mediums where they may threaten one another. Also, there seems to be a phenomenon in some of the young people sending pictures of themselves to one another and not always in fully clothed. And that's strictly between them unless and until those pictures get disseminated elsewhere. And anytime you have children involved, that's a problem as well, because it's, if the person's under 18, that's just a no-go.
Yeah.
But you never know what the recipient's going to do with that picture. There's been some incidents where people would blackmail one another. I will send this out if you don't do X. So, and that's a form of abuse that we don't tolerate either.
So, what did you think when you heard about the Mass State Police and the overtime scandals?
Well, I've always looked upon the state police as being a very high standard performance agency. What they do very well. And they're responsible for investigations all over the state. And I was really disappointed that they would get mired down in this. Mm-hmm. This was just absolutely unnecessary. It was so needless.
Now, what is the future of technology within law enforcement?
Well, we'll see what happens tomorrow, because we're getting more and more media savvy as the 911 system improves, and it will improve dramatically. People will be able to send text messages into our dispatch center. They'll be able to send images directly to the dispatch center, who will in turn be pushed out to us.
Oh, wow.
So that will be helpful, perhaps even short video. We do have our real-time crime center, which monitors a lot of the cameras that throughout the city. And it's not recording them, but it's just kind of keeping an eye on the hot spots. And they can be adjusted. Say there was an incident at place X. Well, if there happens to be any cameras there, we can access those cameras to see what had taken place both in the past and going forward. So that's helpful. It's kind of a force multiplier, because it's, hiring police officers is expensive. expensive. And anytime we can use technology to expand our force, it's certainly worthwhile.
Absolutely. And, you guys do so much for the community, the law enforcement, the police, firemen. And no matter how much crap people might give law enforcement, no matter what, at the end of the day, when you have a problem, 911 is who you're calling. You're calling the police to help you. You're calling the first responders. No matter what, they always have your back and come to the scene to at least see what's happening.
That's true. That's true. And the police department is the 24/7, 365 face of government. So when all else fails, call 911. The cops are going to show up, and we'll see what we can do.
Hey, Mr. McGinn, I'd like to thank you for coming on to my show today. Do you have any last words for anyone who might be inspiring to get involved with law enforcement?
Oh, absolutely. We're always looking for good people. Insofar as recruiting and so forth, we're always out in the community. We're looking for good people from the city to join our department. The test is held every 2 years. It's a statewide civil service list, and take a shot at it. Take the test. If you can't afford it, you can be the fees can be waived. If you have a little bit of interest, well, come down and check us out. I mean, we'd be happy to offer a ride along or so forth to see what you think. So, we're an open book. We serve the community. Like I said before, with a 24/7 face of government, we have nothing to hide. We're very transparent. It is our absolute favorite thing to do is to serve the public. That's why our folks got into this. And a very small fraction of what we do is actually law enforcement or the hardcore law enforcement per se. It's mostly about helping people, getting people into shelters, people in disputes, trying to resolve those issues, any number of things. And we need people in the future to help us out with that. So I would encourage anybody who's interested to contact our department, and we can help you along with that.
Excellent. What would you say is the next step for you in your career?
Well, I'm very happy where I am right now. I work for Chief Steve Sargent, who's doing an amazing job. City Manager Augustus, Mayor Petty, they are fully behind us each and every day. So I'm in a good place. Our department's in a good place, and crime is down. I'm part of the successful team, which I am very, very proud of, and I'd like to remain there for a few more years anyway. So.
Absolutely. Hey, thank you for all the work that you do for the community, Ed.
Thanks so much, Pat.
It was great having you on the show.
My pleasure.
This has been WCRN Weekend and your host, Pat Rice.